There we go. All right, I'm live on the YouTube channel that I haven't used in 2 years now. Let's see. That's not horrid. That works. The important thing is to pick up the audio here. Okay, so test tomorrow. Yay. I know. Aren't you excited about that? Everybody's happy about that. The test is like the last one, 50 questions, all multiple choice, and it's right here. Let's do this. Let's pull up the review sheet, or let me pull up the review sheet, and review key concepts. Review sheet. For those of you who are watching this YouTube at home after the fact, the reason why this is so disorganized is that Canvas is not letting me log in and do things the way I want to do things today. Yeah, it's been down all day long. I kind of assumed they'd have it fixed by now, and they clearly don't. Review sheet 2. Okay. All right. Let's just go line by line through the review sheet here. Oh shoot, that looks like a slightly out of date copy. Emma, you've got your copy with you there.
I think it's the right one.
You don't think it is?
I have 2 copies if you need this one.
I'm going to borrow that. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. All right, let's just go through this line by line here. So the first thing we talked about was going to be, actually, one thing before we start going through this. On this test, if you remember about the Deuteronomistic history, there were multiple sources that the Deuteronomist that he uses. And so as a result, he's kind of conflicted about the monarchy, if you remember right. So on this test, you need to be prepared for some questions where conflicting answers can both be right at the same time. So for instance, how does the book of Samuel feel about the anointing of Saul? Well, anybody remember? Was it a good thing or a bad thing? Okay, it's both. That's right. It's A, a good thing, B, a bad thing, C, a neutral thing, D, both A and B. Well, logically, it doesn't make sense that it's a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. But the correct answer on the test would be D, both a good thing and a bad thing. So that's something you'll have to watch out for. Sometimes that'll happen. Sometimes something like that will be the correct answer. So be prepared for that kind of thing on this test. All right, so let's do this. What's the purpose? What is the DH/former prophets? So remember, the DH is going to be, it's a collection of 6 books. We've got Joshua and Judges, then we have the 2 Samuels, and then we have the 2 Kings. We've got 2 different names for that same collection of 6 books. Yes, it's the Joshua and Judges, it's 1st and 2nd Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Kings. And so we've got those 6 books, and we call that, Christians call it the Deuteronomistic history, and so Jews call it what? Nicely done. Jews call it former prophets, and now we all know the answer to question number 1. All right, so what's the purpose? What's the purpose of the Deuteronomistic history? Okay. Oh, good. It's still recording. Yay. All right. Is it? Yes, it is. Okay. So what's the purpose of the Deuteronomistic history? Well, it's going to tell us the story. It's going to tell us the story of the rise and fall of the Israelite monarchy. It's going to tell us like what went wrong, what caused the Israelites to lose control of the land. So the question then is, how do you follow God in the Deuteronomistic history? And there's two ways that you can do this. The first way is probably obvious, and that's to follow the law. But the second way is also to seek God's heart. And you need to seek God's heart because a good example is somebody like Saul. He follows the law. He offers a sacrifice to God before he goes and fights a battle. Yay, check that block. But is his heart really into this? He's mostly in this for, well, I hope God's on my side so I win the battle, so I get glory and preservation and glory and all that stuff. And so you've got to have that seek God's heart thing in there so that all will be well for you. Who's the hero? At the end of the day, who's the best king of them all? Josiah. That's exactly right. The best king of them all, the true hero at the end of the day is going to be Josiah. David's got his moments. Solomon's got his moments. Even Saul has a moment or two. But Josiah, he's the guy. Yes?
For the last question, what was the second way to follow?
Seek God's heart. So the Israelites in the book of Joshua, the first thing that they're going to do is they're going to take over the land of Canaan / Israel. What's the justification for that? Why are we going to do that? Why are we going to wipe out all of the Canaanites? Is it because they are horrible people and God wants to punish them? Very good. Many of you are saying no. Because you've been studying, that's exactly right. The reason why we are going to kill these people is we want to get rid of their influence. We don't want them to influence us to worship foreign gods. Now, how did Joshua do this? How does Joshua conquer the land of Canaan? And the answer is right there in the question. He does it by conquering people. And when I say conquering, what I mean is military conquest, warfare. And it's a very fast war. He does this very quickly. It's like kind of one city after another. Boom, 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 boom. So Joshua has a very fast, quick, and decisive conquest of the land of Canaan. But that's different than what other books of the Bible said. How does that compare to what other books of the Bible say? That's going to be different. Other books of the Bible, Judges is going to say, well, there was some warfare, but it was kind of slow. And then you've got Exodus saying, well, Exodus says it's going to happen slow, year by year, little by little. And God's going to say, hey, guess what? This is going to happen through pestilence, disease, coronavirus, that kind of stuff. So that was kind of one of our clues. You look befuddled.
Yeah, what book said it was disease?
Exodus does. Exodus. So that was kind of one of our clues to helping us realize, oh, when we read Joshua, we're not necessarily meant to take this as a literal historical account. We're meant to take this more as, okay, this is sort of an introduction to a series of books telling us about the rise and fall of the monarchy. We're supposed to read this theologically, not necessarily literally. Question?
For the one that says that it happens slow, what book was that?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Like the one where it was like, like where the books it said like it was slow, which one was it?
That's Exodus. Oh, the slow conquest was Judges. Slow conquest is Judges. Slow disease is Exodus. So when Joshua attacks places, he wipes everything out, and he kills anybody and everybody in his path. Why does he do that? There's a term we have for that. Anybody remember what that was? Cherem. Nicely done. Very good, Emma. Cherem. The cherem is the commandment is the commandment not to take the spoils of war for ourselves. We're not going to make money off of the conquest of Canaan. The cherem is the commandment not to capture, not to take any of the spoils of war for yourself. We're going to destroy everything, even the cows, even the sheep, even the hamsters. I know, now we get sad when the hamsters are dying here. Women and children, yeah, hamsters. So the theme of the DH, which is our next key concept, which I probably should have had earlier in this list. The theme of the DH is pretty simple. Good things happen when you obey God. Bad things, like getting conquered by the bad guys, by foreigners, happen when you don't obey God. And so, and this theme is perfectly illustrated by the battles of Jericho and Ai. In Jericho, what do? We obeyed God. And what happened? We had great success and we killed all the hamsters. Give me a thing now. People who don't watch the review are going to be like, wait, what? Yes, guys, I don't know, question. How did they come to possess the land of Canaan? Oh, I skipped that one. Okay. Tell you what, let's finish. Okay, yes, you're right. I did skip that one. I'm sorry. Let's finish comparing Jericho and Ai, and then we'll double back that one. Sorry about that. So comparing the battles of Jericho and Ai, when we obey God, we have great success. When we fight the battle of Ai, we lost that battle, and that's because that guy Achan, he kept some treasure, and so we didn't obey God, and so we lose. Okay, so then going back up to, no, we did do that one. How does so the key concept is, how does that compare to what other books of the Bible say about how the Israelites would come to possess the land of Canaan? That's where I said that Judges said it would happen slowly through conquest, and Exodus says it happens slowly but through disease. We clear? Okay, so our next key concept then is the purpose of the covenant renewal ceremony in Joshua 24. Purpose of the covenant renewal ceremony in Joshua 24. It logged in. Yay, finally. I don't know why it matters, but I will. Here, I can give this back to you, Anna. Thank you for lending that to me. Okay. Well, the production value of this looks really bad. The folks on watching this on YouTube are going to be like, I can't see that. And yes, that's true, you can't. But at least the people in class can see this now. So we can all stay on the same page here. So purpose of covenant renewal ceremony in Joshua 24 is where we want to be now. What happens there is Joshua gathers all of the people of Israel together and he says, hey, y'all, we have a choice to make. Are we going to obey Yahweh or are we not going to obey Yahweh? And the reason why we have to ask this question is Joshua has gathered in some non-Israelites as part of his conquest. And so a lot of them are worshiping these foreign gods right now. And Joshua says, are you going to worship these foreign gods? Yes or no? And the Israelites say, check no, we are not going to worship these foreign gods. Well, why not? And so Joshua then says, I don't believe you. And these guys say, yes, we are witnesses. We are testifying that we will not worship foreign gods. And so we get introduced to some legal court language there. And so the whole purpose of this covenant renewal ceremony in Joshua 24 is going to be to say that we make a legally binding covenant or oath that says that we are obligated to worship Yahweh and Yahweh alone. And if we don't worship Yahweh, then God has legal rights to punish us. Harrison, you're nodding. Does that mean you had that one down? Nice. Excellent. Very good. I'm glad to hear it. One more time. All right. So the idea is that the covenant renewal ceremony is going to be a legally binding agreement between the Israelites and Yahweh to say that they would worship Yahweh alone and they're not going to worship anyone else. If they do worship someone else, then God gets to punish them. All right. So next up. All right. So we move on to the book of Judges, models of the conquest of Canaan. How did it happen? What I'm talking about here on this key concept is how do historians, how do archaeologists think that the Israelites took over the land of Canaan? Historians and archaeologists tend to kind of say, we got too many contradictions going on in the Bible. It's probably not. It's meant to be a theological document, not necessarily historically reliable. So what do we do with that? Well, they pay a lot more attention to the archaeological evidence. And when they emphasize the archaeological evidence, what they concluded, well, what they think, at least the prevailing theory right now, is that a small group of Israelites converted the Canaanites. And so you have the Canaanites converted to become Israelites. That's kind of the key, that's kind of the central premise of this. There's different versions of this theory, but the basic idea is we think that the Canaanites became Israelites. And what I tried to stress to y'all in class was that I think there's some virtues of this theory because it helps explain why the Israelites wanted to worship foreign gods so much. Because hey, they were used to it. They did it all the time. They've done it in their past. All right. So questions there? Yes.
Really confused on the models of basically the question.
The basic idea is how do the archaeologists think that Israel got conquered? We looked at the biblical examples. Now we're looking at what do archaeologists think happened. And archaeologists think that Canaanites converted to become Israelites. They started worshiping Yahweh. So what's a judge? A judge is a military warlord. They're a military leader. They're not a king. It's a term that literally means deliverer or one who sets things right. So they're a military leader. It's a warlord, a military leader, a warlord, a deliverer, that's the term I was looking for. The term literally means deliverer or one who sets things right. What's the cycle of Judges? What is the cycle of Judges? Well, the cycle of Judges is going to be that narrative you get in almost every story. The Israelites start worshiping foreign gods, and so they say, so God lets them get conquered by some foreigners. And then they say, "Oh, we're sorry, God. We done messed up." God says, "Yeah, you did." And so God raises up a judge, and the judge sets the Israelites free. Yes, sir. So God is going to raise up. So the Israelites. All right. Step one is the Israelites commit apostasy. They start worshiping foreign gods. God lets them get conquered by a foreigner. The Israelites repent. They say, "We're sorry." God says, okay, you're forgiven. I will raise up a judge, and the judge sets the Israelites free. So after that, we talked about several judges. We talked about Jephthah. Anybody remember anything about Jephthah? This one should stick out in your brain here. Yeah. Why? Why is this? Yeah, Jephthah's the dude who sacrifices his own daughter here. That's a pretty memorable story there. Jephthah sacrifices his own daughter. That probably wasn't a good thing for him to do. The story is written in such a way that implies that Jephthah is a foolish person for doing so. Props, I guess, for being obedient to his oath, but the idea seems to be, hey, why were you such an idiot and made that oath in the first place? Didn't you know your daughter lived there? The next up, we have Deborah. Deborah is a female judge and prophetess. That's a very easy question on the test, but it's important. I want you all to know, hey, there were female leaders. God values female leadership. Gideon. Who's Gideon? Gideon is a judge. He's probably the most powerful of all the judges. The judge, he was given the chance to become king, but he decides he refuses to become king. And that's probably a good thing. That story is told from a positive perspective. At the end of Judges, we have a bunch of, at the end of Judges, we have a series of statements, of verses, of passages that say something to the effect of, in those days there was no king in Israel, and everybody did what was right in their own eyes. And so that leads us to our next key concept, which is going to be reason for kingship here. The reason for kingship is that, according to the book of Judges, why do we need a king? We need a king to enforce the law, to make people obey the law. All right, so our next section is going to be Samson and Saul. We started off talking about Samson, and Samson's the 12th judge of the Israelites. He's the strong judge. He's the Hercules of the Bible, or rather, we should say that Hercules is the Samson of Greek mythology, right? Michelle's like, wait, what? She's still stuck on hamsters. Samson's the very strong judge. What else do we need to know about Samson? How is he different than other judges? Samson is different because he breaks the cycle of the judges. The other 11 judges follow that same pattern, but Samson was different. Anybody remember what makes him different? He does do whatever he wants, and that does make him different. But in this particular case, I was thinking, what makes him different? What sets him? How does he break the cycle of the judges? And at the end of the day, what makes him different is he doesn't set Israel free. The Philistines are still there. Gideon totally gets rid of the Midianites. Jephthah got rid of the Amalekites. Can't remember who he was fighting. Some Ite. But the Philistines are still there even after Samson does his thing. So he breaks the cycle of the judges because he doesn't really set Israel free. And so I guess we already covered reason for kingship and judges. I repeated that once. Sorry about that. So that leads to the reason why we have kingship and judges, because we need to enforce morality. Next up, who is Samuel? Samuel is going to be a prophet who is going to be responsible for anointing the first 2 kings of Israel. He's a prophet, a priest, and a kingmaker.
the step up for us.
He anoints the first two kings of Israel. I don't think there's anything else I need to tell you about Samuel. Just want to double check here. Apologies as I look through this here. I have this nagging feeling that I'm forgetting something, but I don't think I am. Okay. Yeah, that's enough there. Okay, so sources for 1 Samuel. I don't expect you to memorize all the sources. There was the court history of David. There was the book of Jashar. There's a bunch listed in there. I don't expect you to memorize them. I don't have them all memorized. What I want you to be aware of, though, is that this is a compilation of many different sources. This book is a compilation of many different sources. And that's what kind of leads to, as we've mentioned at the beginning of the review today, that's what leads to this kind of conflict, because some of these sources do have good opinions of the kings, and some of these sources are like, no, the kings suck. So that gets into the significance of the sources for 1 Samuel. The significance is that it leads to this conflict for the author of 1 Samuel. He's not really sure. Was Saul a good guy or a bad guy? Well, he was both. You could look at it either way. Philistines. I want you to know that the Philistines are a diverse group of people. They have several different city-states, and they were scary. They were much more powerful than the Israelites were. The Philistines were kind of the primary enemy of the Israelites during this period of the kings. Very fierce, very dangerous enemy for the Israelites. The significance of the sources for 1 Samuel, I should have had that indented there. The significance for the sources of 1 Samuel is there's a variety. It creates this conflict for the author. Are the kings good or the kings bad? Well, they're both. They've got some good points and some bad points. The Philistines, where do the Philistines live? They live on the plain of Philistia, which is the best land in Israel. So that's part of the reason why we have this conflict, because the Philistines have this really great land that the Israelites want. The plain of Philistia. The Philistines live in Philistia, the plain of Philistia. And so for our next key concept, we get an example of this conflict that the Deuteronomistic historian feels about the kings. How do we evaluate the evaluation of Saul's anointing of Samuel? Well, we have one source that says Saul was awesome. Saul was a big king-like dude, quickly kills the bad guys. Yeah, Saul's awesome. Then we have another source woven in there that says, well, Saul kind of sucked. Saul becomes king and then nothing happens, and why do we care? He was kind of annoying. So how do we evaluate Saul's, the evaluation of, should be evaluation of Samuel's anointing of Saul. I've got those S names backwards on there. How do we evaluate this? Well, it was good, it was bad, all at the same time. So don't get that wrong on the test. That's D, both A and B. Rejection of Saul as king is our next point. Why is Saul eventually rejected as king? He fights this battle called the Battle of Gilgal. So at the Battle of Gilgal, he decides to keep all the sheep alive after slaughtering all the hamsters. He keeps all the sheep alive, and that violates the cherem, the ban on taking the spoils of war. And then, in addition to that, he also keeps King Agag. That's Agag is spelled Agag. He keeps King Agag alive. And again, that's in violation of the cherem. So both so God rejects Saul there. And I just realized I forgot to tell you one other thing. God rejects, that's the reason why God rejects Saul. Now, what about Samuel? Why did Samuel reject Saul? Well, that's for a different reason. Samuel rejects him because Saul refused to wait for Samuel to show up and offer the sacrifice to the Lord. Absolutely. Samuel rejects Saul because Saul did not wait for Samuel to offer the sacrifice to the Lord. And no, I will not repeat that again. There were too many S names in there, and I think I got it right that time, so I'm just going to call that a win. Noah seemed to have that one though, because you were like, wait, you're forgetting. I could tell you were like, wait a second, you're forgetting. Yes.
Where did it live in the significance? I know it's the state of Philistia, but like, what was it significant?
The plain of Philistia is the best land in all of Israel. So the Israelites want the plain of Philistia. So they're like, hey, get off of our land. And the Philistines are like, no. Okay, so that knocks out Samson and Saul. Where are we? Next up, we have David. Let me scroll up here. David. So we start the story of David kind of midway through the book of 1 Samuel, and we have the apology for David. That's the first major section on David. Now, if you remember, we use the word apology here in the sense of defending David, not saying, oh, I'm sorry to David. We're using this in the sense of defending David. So the apology for David is an attempt to defend him. What are we defending him against? Well, you could make the claim that David steals the throne from Saul or Saul's family. And so we're going to defend David from the claim that David is stealing the throne from Saul. He's got a legitimate right to the throne according to this narrative. So 2 years ago, a bunch of my students subscribed to this YouTube channel because they were like, hey, this is how class is going to be. And they're probably all getting notifications. Wickman is live now. They're thinking, why? Okay. Where are we? Definition and purpose. Okay, so the apology for David, we've already covered the definition and purpose of it. The definition is it's a defense of David, and the purpose is to defend David against the claim that it is that he's stealing the throne from Saul. Next up, we have how is David introduced to Saul? This is another one of those both and questions. How is David introduced to Saul? Well, we have one story where David plays the harp for Saul, and he becomes the king's armor bearer. We have another story where David shows up and kills Goliath. So there's two different accounts. Yes, you absolutely need to know both. Trust me on this one. One is David comes and plays the harp for King Saul, and in addition to playing the harp for King Saul, he is his armor bearer. And then after that happens, then the second story is he fights Goliath. It's the story of David and Goliath. Where is it? Where are we here? How does Saul die? Another one of those both and questions. One option for Saul, how does he die? Is he kills himself in the middle of battle. The other option on the table is that an Amalekite killed him. So in one case, I mean, he's killed in battle, no matter how you look at it. But in one version, Saul kills himself. In another version, an Amalekite kills him. And Emma, how do we feel about the Amalekite killing him?
We're mad about it.
Yes, that's right. We're very mad about that. Are you going to high five? Is David going to high five this person?
No.
No, that's exactly right. We do not high five people for killing the Lord's anointed. Now, different periods in David's reign. We have 3 different periods in David's reign here. Period number 1 is he is going to be king of just Judah with his capital city at Hebron. Period number 2 is he is going to be king of all of Israel with his capital city at Jerusalem. And then period number 3, I just messed that up. Period number 1, king of Judah, capital city at Hebron. Period number 2, king of Israel, capital city at Hebron. Period number 3, king of all of Israel, and then we move the capital city to Jerusalem.
Wait, I'm sorry. You have king of Judah, king of all Israel, and then king.
Period number 1, Judah and Hebron. King of Judah, capital city Hebron. Period number 2, king of all of Israel, capital city still at Hebron. Period number 3, king of all of Israel, move the capital city to Jerusalem. And we move the capital city to Jerusalem because that's going to lead to our next key concept here. It's going to be it's how David centralizes politics. So our next key concept is centralization of religion and politics. Well, how does David do that? Well, David centralizes the politics by moving the capital city to Jerusalem. That gets the northern Israelites to like him better because he doesn't have the capital city so deep in southern Israelite territory. And we centralize the religion by bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. Yay, go David. Now the Ark of the Covenant is going to stay in one place for the rest of history until the Babylonians steal it. And Indiana Jones finds it. But for the most part, one place.
Where's the Ark of the Covenant?
Yes, the Ark of the Covenant. And so David was doing pretty good for a while until we have the affair of David and Bathsheba. The incident involving David and Bathsheba is a major event. It is not a minor little blip on the radar. It's a major event, and it's what leads to David's sons rebelling against him so frequently. The Bible is going to tell us that David is responsible for seducing. That's not the right word. Seducing is too nice a word. Let's just say sleeping with Bathsheba. That works. David is responsible for the affair. There we go. David is responsible for the affair. And so he's going to be punished. And he's punished for this because through all these sons rebelling against him. This is the sword never departs from the house of David. So then we have the Davidic covenant. The Davidic covenant is something that God throws out to David and says, David, there will always be a descendant of yours on the throne of Israel. Mm-hmm. The Davidic covenant says that there will always be a descendant of David on the throne of Israel forever. Yes, the significance of the David and Bathsheba event is that the sword will never depart from his house. And so all of his sons keep rebelling against him. All right, so how does Solomon become king? I'm looking at the time here. I've got to go pick up my son soon, so we're going to go through this. I'm going to move a little bit faster, and if you miss something, I'm just going to say this. I'm recording this on YouTube, so you can catch up on it after the fact, okay? I will, my apologies, but I do have to go soon, so I want to make sure we get through all of this here. All right, Solomon. How does Solomon become king? Well, Solomon doesn't become king in a straightforward sort of way. He doesn't just hand off, David doesn't just hand off power to him. We have Adonijah tries to take power first, and then after that happens, Nathan and Bathsheba have to go in and convince, or basically trick. Nathan and Bathsheba have to go trick David into declaring Solomon to be the next king. So Adonijah becomes king first, but then Nathan and Bathsheba say, hey, we have to go, we're going to trick David into naming Solomon the next king. What's Solomon known for? Two things: wisdom, temple. Simple, straightforward. Solomon's known for wisdom and building the temple. Syncretism. Syncretism is bad. What is syncretism? Syncretism is the blending of two or more religious traditions. Solomon is responsible for introducing syncretism to the Israelites because his wives, all 700 of them, because his wives get him to worship foreign gods. That's Solomon.
Oh.
That's Solomon. And so that leads to the division of the kingdom. Syncretism, the introduction of these foreign gods, God is going to punish Solomon by dividing the kingdom when his son takes power. So that leads to the division of the kingdom, is our next key concept. In the division of the kingdom, Rehoboam is the king. A guy named Jeroboam comes along and says, hey, can you make our labor easier? And Rehoboam says, no. And so Jeroboam rebels against Rehoboam. As a consequence, we have two different kingdoms. Jeroboam becomes the king of the northern kingdom, and Rehoboam becomes the king of the southern kingdom of Judah. Where are we here? Division of the kingdom, placement of cat. Okay. So after that happens, Rehoboam, who's the king of the southern kingdom, Rehoboam has got control of the temple in Jerusalem. That's a problem for Jeroboam because that's where we're all supposed to be worshiping Yahweh. And so Jeroboam is going to place two calves, one at Dan and one at Bethel. Bethel is spelled B-E-T-H-E-L, Bethel. Dan, D-A-N, Dan. So why do we place them at Dan and Bethel? Well, those are border towns. Those are the northernmost and southernmost points in Israel. So now there's no excuse for you to leave the country to go worship Yahweh. Now, the placement of these calves is not a good thing. We call this the sin of Jeroboam. This is idolatry. And this is going to really be the root cause of why the northern kingdom gets destroyed. Okay, so that wraps up placement of the golden calf, placement of the calves at Dan and Bethel. Get placed at Dan and Bethel. It's idolatry. This is the sin of Jeroboam. You don't have to leave the country anymore to worship Yahweh as a result of this. Or at least that's Jeroboam's idea. Yeah. Moving on to the book of Kings. Evaluation of the northern kings. This one is easy. All northern kings suck. They're all bad. It doesn't matter what your name is. Jeroboam, Joram, Jehu, Ahab, Omri. They all suck. Evaluation of the southern kings. Well, the southern kings are a mixed bag. Some are good. Asa is good. But he has a qualifying statement on him. He was good, but he could have been better. Then you have the southern. Then you also have people like Manasseh, who was just awful, and then you have some great, amazing kings like Josiah. So the southern kings are a mixed bag. Some are good, some are bad, and some are sort of good. And how do we decide how to evaluate these folks? Criteria for evaluating these kings. How do we decide how to do that? It's simple. It's a one-question test. Did you worship Yahweh at the temple? Yes or no? If you worshiped Yahweh at the temple, check. You are a good king. If you did not worship Yahweh at the temple, then you failed the test and you are a bad king. If you did not worship Yahweh at the temple, you are probably worshiping our next key concept, and that is going to be Baal. Baal is a Canaanite god of storms or rain. He may have been a fertility god too, but storms or rain is probably our best understanding of Baal. One of the biblical prophets who was very opposed to the worship of Baal is our next key concept, and that's going to be Elijah. Elijah. In addition to being a kid who draws tanks on the board during one of my classes, Elijah is also a prophet who likes to, who is opposed to the worship of Baal. He is matched up against King Ahab for the most part, and his wife Jezebel. The most famous of these contests is going to be our next key concept, the showdown with the prophets of Baal. And at the showdown with the prophets of Baal, Elijah says, let's each build an altar. We each build an altar, one to Baal, one to Yahweh. And we're going to let our gods light each of these altars on fire for us. The prophets of Baal fail to get their altar lit. Elijah gets God, or Yahweh, to light his altar on fire. And so Elijah does a victory dance, and he kills 450 prophets of Baal. And while he was at it, he also killed all the hamsters. Um, after this happens, Elijah flees and runs away into the desert, and then he comes back and he goes back to the land of Israel, and he has another confrontation with another confrontation with Ahab. This is our next key concept, Ahab's purchase of Naboth's land. In the purchase, in this particular confrontation, Ahab wants to buy Naboth's land. Ahab is not allowed to do so, so Jezebel makes Naboth disappear. Ahab claims the land for himself, and Elijah says that Ahab is wrong to take this land. So why do we care about this story? Well, the reason why we care about this story is it shows us what prophets do. The job of the prophet is to be the moral conscience of Israel, standing up to the king and saying, you may be able to do this, he is the king. He's kind of allowed to do whatever he wants as the king. But Elijah says that's wrong. And so Elijah is the moral conscience of the nation, telling the Israelites what is right and wrong. Okay, dates. So we have two dates that we want to look at here. We've got the year 722/721. What happens in 722/721? That's when the Assyrians, in 721, the Assyrians destroy the northern kingdom of Israel. Then in 586/587, the Babylonians destroyed the southern kingdom of Judah. The southern kingdom of Judah. Now, why does the southern kingdom get destroyed? We know why the northern kingdom gets destroyed. It's the sin of Jeroboam. Why does the southern kingdom get destroyed? Well, that leads to our next key concept, which is going to be who's the worst king of Judah? Who's responsible for Judah being destroyed? And the answer to that one is really surprisingly simple: Manasseh. Manasseh is the worst king. He commits human sacrifice, and Yahweh says, enough of this. I'm done with this kingdom here. And he says, I'm going to let Judah be destroyed. Manasseh is spelled M-A-N-A-S. How's Manasseh spelled? I should know that. It's somewhere on here. M-A-N-A-S-S-E-H. There we go. God doesn't destroy the southern kingdom immediately, because after Manasseh comes along, we get Josiah. And Josiah was awesome. He is the best king of the Israelites. And one of the reasons why he's the best king of the Israelites is he finds this awesome book that everybody should read, according to the Deuteronomistic historian. It is the book of Deuteronomy. It is riveting. It is exciting. It is the greatest book of all time. So the book that Josiah finds is going to be the book of Deuteronomy. They should make a movie about it. Why not? It'd be amazing. Wouldn't that be a great movie? In the end, when Judah gets destroyed, the Deuteronomistic historian is left to finally make. Well, he doesn't really sum everything up and make a final judgment. He just kind of ends the story. But when we look through the whole narrative, how does he ultimately feel about the monarchy? This is another one of those kind of both and questions here. Was it a good thing? Sometimes when we had Josiah, he did find the best book ever, Deuteronomy, which everybody should go home and read tonight. Was it a bad thing? Yeah, we get dudes like Manasseh who commit human sacrifice. That's definitely a bad thing. Could it have been a good thing? Yeah, it could have been if all the kings had been like Josiah. And so the evaluation overall is, it's not this straightforward good, bad. It's kind of this all of the above kind of thing, as I just totally give away the answer there. So don't get that one wrong on the test. That wraps up Kings here. I gotta go soon. Okay, we got time. Chronicles and Nehemiah. Chronicles and Ezra, Nehemiah. Let's knock this out here. Chronicles and Ezra, Nehemiah. How is Chronicles different than the Deuteronomistic history? Well, it tells a lot of the same stories. It tells probably most of the same stories as the DH does. It's telling most of the same stories as the DH, but it's telling them from a different perspective. And that leads to the next bullet point, or the next key concept. Why? What is the purpose here? Trying to like it. Why? What is the purpose? We tell similar stories, or most of the same stories, but from a different point of view, because we're trying to rebuild Israel we're trying to create a positive foundation for Israel to rebuild from. We're not interested in telling the story of how much David sucks and how bad the Bathsheba story was. Mostly what we're interested in is telling the good versions of the story to give the Israelites a foundation to rebuild from. So Chronicles is trying to create a positive spin on the history of Israel to help them rebuild. Then we've got a couple more dates we need to know. We need to know 538, 539. What happens in that? What happens then? King Cyrus of Persia ends the Babylonian exile, says, y'all go home now. King Cyrus of Persia ends the Babylonian exile, says, y'all can go home now. 516/517. That's going to be when we dedicate the second temple. And that leads into what we call Second Temple Judaism, y'all. I know, mind blown. Nicole's not impressed. We have this next bullet point, restoration. I should have attached restoration to the year 538, 539. When Cyrus lets the Israelites go home in 538, 539, we call that the restoration. That's kind of disorganized on my part there, apologies. But when Cyrus, what the overall concept I want you to get is that when Cyrus says the Israelites can go home in 538, 539, we call this the restoration. Now, when the restoration happens, do all of the Jews go home immediately? Good, Victoria, you've got that exactly right. She's shaking her head. No, no. The Jews don't all go home immediately. In fact, the Jews don't ever, not the Jews kind of a lot, there's always a Jewish presence that remains in Babylon. So how many returns are there? Well, there's a lot. There's a series of returns. The Israelites are kind of constantly coming back. Yeah, there's not a specific, it can't say there's a specific number because there's really no way of defining it. I mean, there is one initial major movement led by this guy, Sheshbazzar, and then there does seem to be a second one led by Zerubbabel, but that's probably, that's just kind of how Ezra and Nehemiah write the story. Speaking of Ezra and Nehemiah, there we go. Good segue there. Ezra. What do we need to know about Ezra? Who's Ezra? Ezra's a priest. Ezra is a priest who kind of gets the temple going again. Ezra's a priest. He gets the temple started again by bringing lots of priests back from Persia/Babylon. And after he brings all these priests back with him, he says, you know what, y'all? Because the book of Deuteronomy is the best book ever and it needs to become a major motion picture, he reads the book of Deuteronomy to these people. He reads the law to them. So Ezra is going to be a priest who brings back more priests from Persia/Babylon, and he's going to read the law to the Israelites. Then we have Nehemiah. Nehemiah is going to be a two-term governor of Israel, not a king, two-term governor of Israel. The primary things he's going to do are going to be to rebuild the city walls of Jerusalem, and he's going to kick Tobiah the Ammonite out of the temple. What's that? He's going to kick Tobiah the Ammonite out of the temple. Leading to our next key concept, reading of the law/divorce of foreign wives. After Ezra reads the law to the Israelites, what do? We look around at each other and we say, oops, married a bunch of Canadian women, and so they have got to go. We divorce our foreign wives. Why? Because the law says we're not allowed to be married to foreigners. So when we read the law, we divorce our foreign wives. Why? Because the law says you can't be married to foreigners. There was some opposition to the rebuilding of the city walls by Sanballat. Sanballat is spelled Sanballat. Sanballat was afraid the Israelites would, the rebuilding of city walls would lead to rebellion by the Israelites. That's not good. So he said, don't do it. But Nehemiah did it anyways. And then finally, we have Tobiah, the story of Tobiah the Ammonite. And basically what I want you to know is we kicked him out of the temple. Why do we kick him out of the temple? Well, because the good book says we need to. Because the best book of all time, the book of Deuteronomy, says that Ammonites and Moabites are not allowed to be part of Israel. So Tobiah the Ammonite has got to go. All right, I hope everybody enjoyed this review session. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, be sure to smash that like and subscribe button. It really does help out the channel a lot, y'all. All right, I'll see y'all later. Bye, everyone. Yes.
The last one, it was the Ammonites and who else?